Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to be talking about something that we've covered many times, but I thought we would just kind of give it a nice, different look, something that has a more spiritual feel to it, and that is sustainability. Many people know what the word is. They're hearing things such as the green movement and organic living, but, really what do those words mean? Probably to a lot of big businesses, it means, well, people are going to spend money with us because they start to believe that we're doing the right thing. But what truly is the right thing? What does it mean to our environment? What does it mean to planet Earth and especially to ourselves when we do that? On the program today, we're going to be talking about awakening the dreamer and changing the dream. And I'd like to welcome our special guest, Mr. Paul Spindle of the Earth Wisdom Alliance. Paul, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thanks for having me, Daniel.
Now, let's talk about what this really is when you talk about sustainability from the point of view that really makes a lot more sense other than just empty words that we tend to hear this day and age.
Well, I think sustainability is really the ability for us to live our lives without sacrificing the ability of future generations to live theirs. And so that it covers all things in terms of how we produce things, how we consume things, what we do to the earth, what we do to the water, etc., what we do to each other.
Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of people, they see this, they realize, for instance, this is something that really needs to be addressed. Then they get up, they go to work, they've got bills to pay, and it's another day. How can somebody kind of change that attitude to where they feel more self-responsible about what we're talking about here?
Well, I think, that's a great question, is how we get people into action, right?
Exactly.
And in trying to do things. But, I encourage people to start small. Start with things right in your own frame of reference in your own house. From composting more, recycling more. I went from one garbage pickup a week to one garbage pickup a month merely by going to composting and recycling. That's a little thing, but imagine if 40% of the population started doing that. Then all of a sudden we've made a drastic change. Mm-hmm. And so, a lot of things in our own circle of influence, we don't have to necessarily change the government right away or corporate practices to make a difference. We can do it right in our own houses and in our neighborhood.
Now, if you can, Paul, tell us what the Earth Wisdom Alliance is.
Sure. The Earth Wisdom Alliance is a local group here in Portland made up of some committed folks who have all attended the Awakening the Dreamer Symposium and are now trying to put that symposium on throughout the Northwest to help enlighten people a little bit about what's really going on. So it's a nonprofit here based out of Portland, and we try and do as many symposiums as we can to help. And that, again, is something that each one of us can do, is be involved in an organization that's trying to do good things.
Now, Paul, tell us about the symposium, what people experience as they attend these particular meetings.
Well, there's an author named Paul Hawken, and he's written a book called Blessed Unrest. And I think Blessed Unrest is the epitome of what happens to people who come to the symposium. It creates some uneasiness in you because we talk about where are we and how did we get here. And those two sections of the symposium are pretty depressing when we look at what's going on from an environmental sustainability perspective, a social justice perspective. It's pretty depressing. But there's hope, and that's the blessed part, that if we start turning things around, and we start turning things around quickly, there's hope for a much better society and a longer-term society on this earth, and there's hope there. So the Awakening the Dreamer, Changing the Dream Symposium starts with talking about where are we and how did we get here, because of course we can't really fix where are we unless we know what caused it. We talk about that, and then we talk about, well, where do we go from here and what's possible, and that's pretty exciting part.
Well, yeah, especially when you take a look at this day and age that we see a lot of the big, March on Wall Street situations going on where deep inside I think we're beginning to vibrate into a reality that says the way we've been doing things is doing two things. A, for one thing, it isn't sustainable, at least for all, and the second thing is that it's just unreasonable. And, but then again, the question becomes, what is the next step? And it's going to take some time. I mean, this has taken, a good few hundred years for us to be in the direction to where we are now. The question is now, what next?
Right. And, it's interesting. One of the things, if you look at or come to the symposium, you'll see that actually a lot of this has happened in the last 70 years, starting with the Industrial Revolution and the increased population growth that spiraled around the world. Mm-hmm. And those two things have had such a dramatic impact just in the last 70, 80 years that it's kind of shocking, at how fast we've turned this thing around. Interestingly, if I look at the demographic, if you will, of the Beyond 50 show, I'm 54. A lot of us had all these ideals when we were in college about how we wanted to change the world, and then we got sucked into the corporate life. And
you have kids,
going
and sometimes that happens.
Right, and yet now I think many of us are starting to say, wait a second, this isn't really what we signed on for. Mm-hmm. This really isn't what we were hoping. This really isn't the world that we wanted to have. And the younger generation is starting to challenge that as well. And so we have a great opportunity to combine all of us into saying, well, what do we want to recreate? The Awakening the Dreamer, Changing the Dream came from some visits with some indigenous tribes people down in the rainforest areas of Ecuador. And some people who had gone down there and saw the devastation of the rainforest and the polluting of the waterways by the oil companies that had gone down there said, to one of the elders, well, what can we do to help you? And one of the elders said, well, what can we do to help you? Because they very much believe in a dream culture. And what they talk about is that, we in the modern world, if you will, have a dream, but it's not a sustainable one. Mm-hmm. And so what can we do to awaken the dreamer in us and look at changing our dreams to live more with the earth rather than just on the earth, to learn to live more with each other rather than competing and fighting and war, etc. And it's a great opportunity if we get it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what's interesting, too, is that you talk about competition, that it's about people going and getting, their piece, they're growing, building wealth. And it was really interesting because a couple of years ago, we actually featured a segment. It was called The Madness of George W. Bush. And it was about a local guy who actually is a dream workshop facilitator. And he says, well, he could be the Antichrist or he could be the next Messiah, depending on how you want to look at it. And really, when you take a look at the fact of how, for instance, he went out of office saying, look, we're asking you, in fact, he wasn't asking anybody anything any more than they have been over the last several years, to be able to help us out by giving us, $700 billion in bailout money. You realize that we've come to a head, and when you see this march on, for instance, Wall Street, you say to yourself, okay, those greedy son of a guns, we're bailing them out again and again and again. You've got to remember how complicit we were in all of this coming about in the first place by sort of turning the other cheek and buying into a system that eventually imploded in on itself. So you have to say to yourself, okay, so what do I do next? And will it be effective and sustainable all at the same time?
Absolutely. I mean, we have some responsibility in all of what's going on. We can't just blame Wall Street or blame, many of the people who are blaming Wall Street have money invested in organizations that are part of Wall Street, and so, I mean, there's little things we can do, changing banks, for example, the local credit unions as a big movement that's gone on lately. Looking at who your cell phone provider is. We have Credo Working Assets out there doing great things, and they're a cell phone provider. What are we doing to change our everyday behaviors, spending our money? There's a great book out called The Better World Shopping Guide, and it ranks companies and products based on environmental sustainability, community involvement, social justice kinds of things, and you can shop where your values are. And it takes some, intention to say, I want to do something different than I've done it, and how do I go about doing that?
I know, and here we were, just not too long ago, you had James Cameron produces a movie, Avatar, okay?
Right.
Shows how we go to another planet to get what we want to get and basically mow down indigenous people, and eventually, showing how ecosystems become affected. And a lot of people probably walked away and said, oh, well, that's great, well, but I'm going back to my cell phone and my way of doing things, for instance. And you have to ask yourself, what is it going to take to be able to hit somebody in the heart the right way to inspire them to move in a direction that at first seems daunting? It seems, as you were saying earlier, you're idealistic in college, you get out there in the world, pretty soon you start kind of getting knocked around a little bit and saying, okay, well, that was great then, but, now I've got bills to pay, and, what do I do next? But what do you think it takes to be able to shock people into doing the right thing, so to speak?
Unfortunately, one of the things that we see in human beings individually and collectively is that oftentimes in order to make change, we have to hit the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you talk to counselors, they say, you got to hit the wall before you're willing to make change. I'd like to think as a society we could get smarter than that, and we could see the wall coming really fast, and we could decide to turn first,
right.
And make that change. Unfortunately, that doesn't. We're going to have to wait till the water levels rise from warming, and some major cities around the world start flooding, and some drastic things start going on more than they have even so far. I mean, we have Glacier National Park that doesn't have glaciers in it hardly anymore. Yet people don't seem to notice that or pay much attention to that. Everybody, focuses on the polar bear. Well, polar bear is great, and I love polar bears, and yes, they're having a struggle because they can't live on ice caps that aren't there anymore. But people don't get that connection, right? Mm-hmm. So it's going to take some cities flooding or some other drastic kinds of things going on before I think many people will make change. In a perfect world, we'll start seeing that these things are happening. There was just a scientist about a week or so ago, who was in the Oregonian, funded by the Koch brothers, however you say their name, so a conservative think tank, and he actually came out and said, yes, I've been wrong, global warming is happening. Mm-hmm. And, that's really cool. That was a huge moment because he is somebody who was funded by the non-believers, if you will, that it was happening. And he's come out and said, hey, guess what? It really is. And so hopefully that will help turn some people around to recognize that, hey, we do need to do some work on global warming or climate change, as you will.
Now, here's the other thing, too, Paul, before I introduce a wonderful ancient people of Ecuador, is that there is a piece of news that should be huge that apparently seems buried. Now, for years, down in South America, there has been a lawsuit against British Petroleum. The people have finally won. And it alarms me that nobody really hardly knows about this because of the power of winning something like that against an oil company. And you wonder, what would think about that. That's pretty powerful stuff.
Absolutely. Well, and some of the countries down there are doing some great things, for example, including the rights of nature in their constitution. And yet, we wouldn't do that. The UN Committee on Climate Change, has a number of, the Kyoto protocols, a number of things that are going on to help protect this world, and the U.S. is one of the few countries that hasn't signed on to some of those. How are we doing?
Yeah, but yet we'll throw green, sustainable, and organic all over the place.
Absolutely.
On all of our labels.
Absolutely.
Now let's talk about who the Ashwar are. I hope that's the proper pronunciation.
Yeah, that did pretty good. That's one of the indigenous tribal people down in Ecuador, and in the symposium you see us, we show videos and conversations with these people about what's gone on in their world and the devastation that has gone on there. And yet, one of the things has been the oil production down there and the leaking of oil into the aquifers and their water, so that their fishing isn't isn't able to be done anymore. That they're planting, because there's so much oil in the groundwater now, and just what's happening to change their lives dramatically to the negative.
Mm-hmm.
And yet also they don't get any benefit, if you will, from the oil that's being produced there in terms of economically. It all goes to some rich people and the government. And so the Ashwar, though, just some really cool people. They're they talk about it from a very philosophical perspective. They realized that in order for them to survive, they needed to reach out to the modern world and start talking to us about how we could do things differently to not destroy their world, that they couldn't do it alone.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating thing, Paul, we had on our program actually a few times John Perkins, and he is known as what is called an economic hitman, and he's been out there blowing the whistle on the kind of work that he used to do, which is to go down and exploit these indigenous cultures by, saddling them with these what are called infrastructure loans. And he basically shifted, and he says it's creating a great shift for more people who were doing the kind of work that he was doing are no longer doing it, and they're out there and they're saying, hey, enough is enough. And it's really exciting to know when people such as him, they begin to turn and realize, I've been doing the wrong thing and been blinded by my own actions, but I'm going to take what I know and I'm going to turn this around. And again, he was saying that it was really fascinating how for years when he used to go to places, for instance, Harvard to lecture, he says all these people used to want to do is they were going to Harvard because they wanted to learn how to make a lot of money. But now they want to learn how to make a difference. So as you were saying earlier in the program, it's not just idealism anymore where that's fun, you can fantasize about it in college, you can write maybe a great thesis, graduate, and then you go about the world and you forget all about that. But the point is that people are actually beginning to take quite a bit of action. Share, besides the symposiums that you produce here, what kind of action you've seen that gives you a lot of hope and possibility for our listeners.
Well, if I can, just for a second, John Perkins is one of the founders of the Pachamama Alliance. And Pachamama refers to Mother Earth.
Right.
And so the Pachamama Alliance, which is based out of the Bay Area, was the original group to start the Awakening the Dream or Changing the Dream Symposium. So, John, when you talk about John Perkins and his change, I'll even share with you Dan Wyden here locally of Wyden and Kennedy, very large advertising company. He, too, has become a great supporter of the Pachamama Alliance. He had his organization put together a video called 4 Years Go, which people can look at on the web, 4 Years Go, and it's a very short Wyden and Kennedy type of commercial, if you will, about what needs to happen on this earth to turn things around. And so there's Dan Wyden also saying, hey, for years I've my company's grown based on convincing people to buy things that maybe they didn't need.
Right.
And yet he's seen some of the same things that John Perkins has and decided that he wants to try and help. I mean, he's not going to close down his advertising agency, but I believe he's doing it in a different way now than he was before.
Mm-hmm. Well, it'd be really fascinating, with the way that they show these things that really aren't so good for us, but they show them to be sexy, so do them anyway, such as smoking. If you remember the day and age, there was that, and there was drinking alcohol, and advertising campaigns, slanted to make people believe, do this and this is what you'll become. To be able to make something like this particular movement sexy, exciting, because when you think about the personal payoff, when you talk about awakening the dream and we talk about the Ashwa people, this is something that they're into, that they are, they're self-sufficient, they're a self-sufficient dream culture. I believe in dreams. As a lucid dreamer for many years, it's quite amazing the benefits that you have personally from something like this. Describe what that is for people and what they're missing out on.
Well, even for me, if I get clear on who I want to be and the kind of life I want to live, one of the cool things that happens is when I start doing things, even though they're small, it kind of makes me giddy.
Right.
And if we would get away from thinking that gross national product is the way we should measure our success, but maybe consider gross domestic happiness, we don't get happier when we buy new things. There's that initial yippee, and then we start trying to figure out how we're going to continue to pay for the boat or the car or the big TV screen or whatever it is. Whereas if I can do a little thing for my fellow man and from a social justice perspective, I get giddy. If I do start my composting, I go out to turn it, and I see all the creatures in there that are taking advantage of my waste and turning it into dirt. I get a yippee feeling.
Mm-hmm.
There's a good feeling of doing things both individually and then with community, with other people that are helping to be a positive influence on this earth and the people that are here. So to me, that's one of the benefits. John Perkins feels better about his life that he's doing now than he did before, no
mm-hmm.
question.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something I encourage people to do, is to start doing things that will make them feel better about how they're living.
Mm-hmm. Now, tell us about the website that you have where people can find out more about this and what they can do individually.
So the Earth Wisdom Alliance, it's all one word, earthwisdomalliance.org, is our local website. And we try and put on there the upcoming symposiums and the dates for those and locations. And that's a great way to start, is to come to the symposium. One of the things that happens there is we try and build community in those workshops. At the end, we have a section called Getting into Action, where people get to group up into different areas of interest that they have and try and figure out how they can work with some other people in those symposiums to take some action steps. And whether it's going to volunteer in a group that's planting a community garden or going to deal with some homeless people, there's action steps that come from that. So the Earth Wisdom Alliance website is a great place to go for information. And then we have monthly meetings that you can find out about at the symposiums, and we put you on our mailing distribution to come to the meetings where we talk about future symposiums. We have guest speakers. We show movies, Economics of Happiness, another great movie to talk about what's going on with the world and how things are happening. So we do that. And then another great website is, of course, the Pachamama Alliance, which is the founding organization down in the Bay Area.
Fascinating stuff. Paul Spendle, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program. It's always good to know that there are ways that people can find a way to not just connect with themselves, but with others to do the right thing.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you having me on there. I'm more than happy to come back anytime.
Thank you again, Paul. It's been a pleasure.
Take care. Make it a great day.
You too. We want to thank you, the listeners, for tuning in. Be sure to visit us at our website at beyond50radio.com. That's the number 50. Sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter. We'll also have an archive of this show on our blog, so be sure to visit there. Share that and share it with others. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.